The man who called himself Bart pulled the brim of his dusty hat lower, the coarse wool scratching against a brow accustomed to fine silk. Bartholomew Hayes, owner of the largest cattle empire west of the Mississippi, felt the unfamiliar chafe of a working man's clothes against his skin, a deliberate discomfort he had chosen. From his sprawling ranch headquarters, he managed a web of trading posts, rail lines, and land holdings, a kingdom built on shrewd deals and a reputation for fairness. But a shadow had fallen upon a corner of his map, a place named Prosperity. The ledgers from his flagship general store there told a strange story. Profits were soaring, yet the accounts for worker provisions, medical supplies, and basic rations were suspiciously, impossibly low. It was a mathematical contradiction that whispered of rot. Then came the letter, unsigned and penned in a shaky hand, speaking of a tyrant on a small throne and the quiet desperation of the good people under his employ. Bartholomew could have sent an agent, a man in a suit, to ask polite questions. But he knew that the truth doesn't speak to suits, it speaks in the weary sighs of the overlooked and the fearful silence of the oppressed. So he had shed his name, his wealth, his power, and had ridden into his own town as a nobody, a drifter looking for a day's wage. He stood now across the wide, muddy street from his own establishment, the grandest building in town, its sign reading Hayes Mercantile, the best in the territory. Through the window, he saw a woman on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floorboards with a vigor born of fear. Her shoulders trembled. What kind of prosperity was built on such quiet sorrow? Stay with me, because the answer to that question would not just unravel a single man's cruelty, but would redefine the very meaning of power, and it holds a lesson that echoes from the dusty floorboards of the past into the very rooms we stand in today. Bartholomew crossed the street, the worn heels of his boots sinking into the mud. He pushed open the heavy oak door of the mercantile, the familiar scent of milled flour, cured leather, and brewing coffee filling his nostrils. It was a smell he associated with success, with growth. But today, it felt tainted. A man with a pinched face and a pristine waistcoat stood behind the main counter, polishing a silver dollar with a proprietary air. This had to be Thaddeus Blackwood, the manager. Bartholomew approached, keeping his eyes downcast, his posture stooped in a practiced display of humility. "Mister," he began, his voice a low rumble, "heard you might have need of a strong back. I can stock shelves, sweep up, whatever's needed." Blackwood looked him up and down, his gaze a dismissive inventory of his worn clothes and calloused hands. The last one couldn't keep up, he sneered, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Pay is $1 a day, plus a share of day-old bread. Take it or leave it." It was half the wage Bartholomew mandated for his workers. A fire ignited in his chest, but he banked it, nodding meekly. "I'll take it," he said. It was then he saw the woman from the window up close. She was rising from the floor, her face pale with exhaustion, a stray wisp of brown hair clinging to her damp forehead. She looked at him with a flicker of sympathy before her eyes darted towards Blackwood, and the light in them vanished, replaced by a guarded fear. "Anna May," Blackwood barked, "the storeroom floor needs seeing to." "Don't dawdle." The woman, Anna May, flinched almost imperceptibly and nodded, grabbing her bucket. Bartholomew, now Bart, watched her go, her spine straight with a dignity that her circumstances tried so hard to steal. He had found the heart of his investigation. He wasn't just here to check the books, he was here for her, and for all the others who suffered under this small king in his castle of stolen goods. The days that followed were a masterclass in calculated cruelty. Bartholomew, working alongside Anna May in the cavernous storeroom and on the main floor, witnessed Thaddeus Blackwood's tyranny in excruciating detail. It was in the way he used a weighted thumb on the scales when selling grain to a poor farmer, his sleight of hand so practiced it was nearly invisible. It was in the way he publicly berated Anna May for a spot of dust he himself had kicked onto a freshly swept floor, his voice dripping with condescending venom until her face burned with shame. One afternoon, Anna May's young son, a frail boy of about 7, came to the store's back door, his face flushed with fever. "Mama," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "Dr. Adams said I need the quinine." Anna May's face, already etched with worry, crumpled. She went to Blackwood, her voice a desperate plea. "Mr. Blackwood, please, an advance on the medicine." "You can take it from my wages for the month." Blackwood laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Company policy is no advances." If you were a more diligent worker, perhaps you'd have saved a few cents for such emergencies. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Bartholomew watched as Anna May returned to her son, her eyes hollow. She slipped him the piece of day-old bread that was her own lunch, her hands trembling. "Go on home, Thomas. I'll figure something out later." Hidden in the shadows of the storeroom, Bartholomew approached her. "That was a cruel thing he did," he said softly. Anna May didn't look up from sorting sacks of beans. "Mr. Blackwood has his ways," she whispered, a sentence that spoke volumes of normalized abuse. "We just do what we must to survive, sir." The title "sir," spoken to a man she believed was a fellow laborer, was a testament to her innate grace. It was in that moment Bartholomew's mission solidified. This was no longer about profit and loss. It was about restoring a woman's stolen dignity and a town's broken spirit. Bartholomew realized that Blackwood's evil wasn't just personal, it was systemic, a meticulously crafted engine of theft. While stacking crates late one night, a task assigned to him as a punishment for being a moment late that morning, he noticed a loose floorboard beneath a heavy desk in Blackwood's office. The manager was out at the saloon, his booming laughter echoing from down the street. Driven by a cold certainty, Bartholomew pried the board open. Beneath it was a second ledger, this one bound in dark, unmarked leather. He lit a small candle, his heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. The first few pages confirmed his worst fears. This was the real record. He saw the true sales figures, nearly double what was reported in the official books he received back at the ranch. He saw the vast quantities of supplies, flour, sugar, medicine, marked as spoiled or damaged, which were then sold out the back door for pure cash profit. He saw the names of his employees next to their wages. Blackwood was recording the full, mandated salary in the official ledger, but in this secret book, he detailed the pittance he actually paid them, pocketing the massive difference. But the most damnable entry was under medical provisions. He saw the line item for the expensive quinine, the very medicine Anna May's son desperately needed. It was marked as dispensed, dated that very day, with a note, sold to Ryder, full price. Blackwood hadn't just refused to help the sick child of his employee, he had taken the medicine intended for the store's emergency stock and sold it to a passing traveler for a premium. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just theft. This was a man profiting from the potential death of a child. This book was more than evidence, it was the anatomy of a soulless man. He carefully replaced the floorboard, the secret ledger now tucked securely inside his coat. He had the proof, but he needed something more. He needed the man's own voice to hang him. Their opportunity came 2 nights later. A well-dressed supplier, a man with the same predatory glint in his eyes as Blackwood, was sharing a bottle of whiskey with the manager in his office after hours. Bartholomew, tasked with mucking out the stables behind the mercantile, found a spot beneath the office's open window, concealed by a stack of empty rain barrels. The air was still, carrying their voices with perfect clarity. "You run a tight ship, Thaddeus," the supplier said, his words slightly slurred. Highest margins in the territory of Blackwood preened, his ego swelling with the liquor and the praise. "It's simple business," he boasted, his voice thick with arrogance. "You just have to understand your cattle. The workers, the townsfolk, they're cattle. They expect to be led, to be squeezed. They complain, but they are too scared or too stupid to do anything about it." He let out a low chuckle. "Take the widow, Anna May. Her boy is sick. She begs me for medicine. I tell her no. Then I sell that same medicine, which old man Hayes pays for, mind you, for 10 times its cost. She gets to pray, and I get the profit." "It's poetry," the supplier roared with laughter. "And Hayes? The big man himself? Does he never suspect?" Blackwood refilled his glass, the sound of the liquid splashing into the crystal sharp and obscene in the quiet night. "Hayes? He's a legend in his own mind, sitting in his mansion counting coins he thinks he earned. He has no idea what happens in the real world. He signs the papers I send him, sees the profits, and thinks I'm a miracle worker. The old fool is my greatest asset." Bartholomew leaned his head back against the rough wood of the barrel, his eyes closed. Every word was a hammer blow, forging his cold fury into a sharp, diamond-hard resolve. He had the confession. The ledger in his coat felt like a block of ice, the numbers and names a silent chorus of the wronged. He now had the voice, the arrogant, damning words of the tyrant himself. The trap was set. All that was left was to spring it in the most public, most devastating way imaginable. The next morning, the mercantile was bustling. It was Saturday, the day ranchers and townsfolk came to stock up for the week. The sheriff was there, enjoying a free cup of coffee, and the mayor was discussing a new town ordinance with a few other influential men near the counter. The air was thick with the energy of commerce, an energy Bartholomew knew was built on a foundation of lies. He waited for the perfect moment. Anna May was carefully polishing the main counter when Blackwood approached her. "This isn't clean enough," he snapped, loud enough for several customers to hear. He deliberately knocked over a small jar of molasses, the thick, dark liquid oozing across her freshly cleaned surface. "Now look at the mess you've made. Clumsy woman. You'll be staying late to clean it, without pay." The humiliation was a public spectacle, a display of power meant to cow not just Anna May, but everyone who witnessed it. That was the trigger. Bartholomew stepped forward from the back of the store, his Bart's persona still in place. "That wasn't her fault," he said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made several heads turn. "You knocked it over." Blackwood whirled around, his face contorting with rage. "You? The floor sweeper dares to question me." He puffed out his chest. "You're fired. Get out of my store. Now." He jabbed a finger toward the door. "Sheriff, escort this vagrant off my property." The sheriff, a portly man who clearly enjoyed his comfortable relationship with the manager, started to move forward. "Now hold on, son, you heard Mr. Blackwood." It was the moment Bartholomew had been waiting for. The entire town's attention was focused on this small drama, on the powerful manager and the lowly drifter. They were all witnesses. They were his jury, your property. Bartholomew's voice changed. The subservient, gravelly tone of Bart was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant command that silenced the room. He stood up straight, his full height seeming to fill the space. He slowly took off the dusty, worn hat, revealing a face that many in the room recognized from newspapers or formal portraits. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The mayor's eyes went wide. The sheriff stopped in his tracks, his mouth agape. Thaddeus Blackwood's face went from crimson with rage to ashen white with terror. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. "This is not your property, Mr. Blackwood," Bartholomew Hayes said, his voice like the crack of a whip. "This is my property. This is my town. And these are my peoples." He took a step forward, his gaze locking onto the trembling manager. "And you, sir, are a thief and a tyrant." He reached into his coat and produced the dark leather ledger, holding it up for all to see. "I have here your real accounting, Thaddeus. Not the fantasy you've been sending me. The book that details every dollar you've skimmed, every wage you've stolen, and every bit of medicine you've hoarded from the sick." The crowd murmured, the sound growing into an angry buzz. Bartholomew's eyes then found the supplier from the other night, who was trying to slip out the back. "And you," he called out, "I believe you're familiar with the term cattle. Last night, Mr. Blackwood was kind enough to explain his entire philosophy to me. A philosophy where good, hard-working people are treated as livestock to be squeezed." The manager began to stammer. This is a misunderstanding, a fabrication." But his voice lacked all conviction. He was cornered, exposed, and utterly defeated. The power he had wielded moments ago had evaporated into thin air, leaving only a pathetic, frightened man in its place. "Sheriff," Bartholomew commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Arrest this man for theft, fraud, and endangerment." The sheriff, now eager to be on the right side of power, quickly apprehended the sputtering Thaddeus Blackwood, who offered no resistance. As the former manager was led away, a stunned silence fell over the store. Bartholomew Hayes turned to face the crowd, his employees and his customers. His expression softened from righteous anger to one of deep regret and resolve. "I want to apologize to all of you," he began, his voice ringing with sincerity. "I built this enterprise on the promise of fairness, but I became too distant. I trusted the wrong man, and I allowed a rot to fester in the heart of this community. That ends today. He walked over to the main counter, where a stack of credit slips and debt records were kept. With a single, decisive motion, he swept them off the counter and onto the floor. As of this moment, every outstanding debt owed to this store by anyone in this town is hereby forgiven. You all start fresh. A wave of joyous disbelief swept through the room. People began to cheer, to embrace. Then, Bartholomew turned to the person at the center of it all, Anna May. She stood by the counter, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He walked to her, his demeanor gentle. "Anna May," he said, his voice soft but clear for all to hear. "I have seen your dignity, your honesty, and your quiet strength in the face of cruelty. This store needs a leader with integrity. It needs a heart. I am promoting you to general manager of this mercantile, effective immediately." The cheering erupted, louder this time than before. He then placed a heavy pouch of coins on the counter. "And this is for your son's medicine, and for a doctor from the city to ensure he makes a full recovery. It is the first of many amends I intend to make." A few months passed. The golden light of a late afternoon streamed through the clean windows of the Hayes Mercantile, illuminating a store transformed. The oppressive silence of fear was gone, replaced by the cheerful hum of conversation and commerce. Laughter was a common sound now. Anna May stood behind the counter, not as a manager in an office, but as a leader among her staff. She moved with a newfound confidence, a smile gracing her lips as she helped a customer and shared a kind word with an employee. Her son, Thomas, fully recovered and with color in his cheeks, sat on a stool nearby, happily reading a book from the store's new lending library, an initiative Anna May had started. The shelves were fully stocked, and the prices were fair. A large board near the door listed the mercantile charter, a document penned by Bartholomew himself. It guaranteed fair wages, an 8-hour workday, and free medical provisions for all employees and their families. It was a revolutionary concept for the territory. Bartholomew sat at a small table in the corner, sipping coffee and watching the scene unfold. He was no longer a distant owner. He visited regularly, not as an inspector, but as a partner and a friend. He saw the trust being rebuilt, not just in his store, but in the idea of a community. Anna May's leadership was firm but compassionate. She had hired back workers Blackwood had unjustly fired and had fostered an environment where people felt valued. The profits were steady, not as artificially inflated as Blackwood's had been, but they were honest, built on loyalty and goodwill. This, he realized, was true prosperity. It wasn't found in a secret ledger, but in the open, hopeful faces of the people he served. His journey into the dark had brought him back into the light, with a clearer vision than ever before. This transformation was not confined to the small town of Prosperity. The Hayes Charter of Fair Business became a standard that Bartholomew implemented across all his holdings, from the cattle ranches to the freight offices. Other business magnates in the territory first scoffed, then watched as his businesses thrived, his workers becoming the most loyal and productive in the West. Slowly, begrudgingly, they began to adopt his methods. A single act of courage and justice had sent ripples of change across the entire frontier, lifting thousands out of quiet desperation. The story of the rich man who became a poor man to find the truth became a quiet legend, a modern parable told around campfires and in saloons. But this story is not just about a man in a dusty hat in a bygone era. It's about a timeless principle. Look around you, at your own world. Your domain may not be a cattle empire, but you have one. It is your family, your workplace, your community. In that domain, who is the Anna May, the person working with quiet dignity against unseen struggles? Who is the Thaddeus, the small tyrant wielding their limited power to diminish others? We all have the capacity for both. We can become disconnected, sitting in our own headquarters, trusting the ledgers and ignoring the whispers of trouble. Or we can choose to walk across the street, to put on the clothes of humility, and to see the world from a different perspective. True power is not the authority you hold, it is the compassion you show. It is the courage to confront injustice, not just for your own benefit, but for those who have no voice. So I ask you, what injustice are you willing to walk past today? And what would happen, what beautiful, transformative change could you bring to your world, if you decided to stop, to listen, and to act?